Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today I thought we'd talk a little bit about my spiritual counsel. So the divine energies, deity, spiritual guides that I work with in my own personal tarot practice as well as my personal spiritual practice. So today I'm going to show you just a few of the decks and random accoutrements that I use and that I work with in alignment with certain deity. I'm not going to go too deep into those deity. It's not going to be information about how I work with them specifically. I have talked about that a little bit in my space. I'll continue to talk more about it there because it is a very personal interaction. But I thought it would be great to just talk for a moment about the idea of working with these deity and the things that I use to connect and commune with them. This is, of course, just my own interpretation of how I've come to understand these energies and how I work with them personally. And of course, that may vary from how you see them or work with them or how others have presented them. So with that in mind, let's jump in and talk a little bit about the tools that I use to access that energy and commune with those deity. So we're going to start with the Morrigan. This is a new deity energy that I've been working with for the last few months. My first interaction with the Morrigan actually came through this deck, the Call of the Morrigan. Now I've talked about this oracle deck many times on my channel here now because I've been working with it pretty steadily over the last few months. It was not so much the call to the Morrigan that brought me to this deck as it was the art. And the fact that it was about Morrigan really didn't register when I first got this deck. I was just like, the art is beautiful. I just really want to see it up close and personal. I want to engage with it. And so I went ahead and purchased it. It is a mass market oracle deck, so it was readily available and easy for me to get my hands on. Once I got this deck into my collection though, I was like, okay, clearly the Morrigan is reaching out, because then I started getting the signs. Then I started seeing the things, right? Started feeling the energies. And so I started to dive into my research about the Morrigan to learn more about the deity herself, her story, things of that nature, kind of my general process when I'm getting to know a new deity. And as things have evolved, I have gathered a few things to help me in my communion with the Morrigan. So I do use the Call of the Morrigan as kind of like my main focal point in my readings, or my communions, as I call them, with the Morrigan. And to help me sort of facilitate that connection, I have a few sort of tools here. So not every deity has the same type of tools, and I don't work with them all in the same way. Like I mentioned, I use the Call of the Morrigan as my central focus for my communion with the Morrigan, the work that I'm doing, and also as a way to learn more about her story, because there's quite a bit in the little guidebook about what each of these cards reference and what they relate to the Morrigan myth and her legacy. And what has happened over the last few months, and I've mentioned in other videos, is I got in my prototype of the Endless Tarot and the Morrigan has claimed it. It is now hers. And that sounds really funny when you say it out loud, but like if you're here, I feel like I said this already in another video, but if you're here, you're probably following me. This is her deck. I ended up backing another copy of this on Kickstarter just so I could have one too, because this is also sort of my BG3 Bloodweave deck, but this copy is now hers. So I use this as a way to commune with the Morrigan. So I look for the Oracle deck to provide me that main message, and then I look to the tarot here to help me expand upon that message. We'll just do a little flip through, a little playing with pairs in my spiritual counsel, because this is very much how I work with the deck. I do tend to have a few more tarot cards on the table, 4 or 5 maybe total. It depends on what I'm feeling. A lot of times I will pull other oracle decks into this, but this is the main 2 decks that I use in my work with her. So I know that when she comes to me, when I'm working with that energy, when I'm accessing the story, the myth, the energy that is the Morrigan, my message for today would be the joining, and then I have the 9 of Swords and the 4 of Wands. So that's the messaging around that joining energy. I do always get into the guidebook just to learn more about the story, the myth. This is a particular deck that I couldn't work with it very well without the guidebook, just because I feel like the stories themselves, who these characters are, what they represent, is so pivotal to the work and to the messaging that I really need to get into that guidebook. And that's fine for when I'm doing communion work with deity, because I'm setting intention to spend time with them, to work with that energy, to learn, to engage. and to bring that into my own sense of being and my own daily interactions. So having to take the extra time to get into the guidebook is not a detriment to this work. It actually enhances it. And I do tend to use a lot of decks that I get into the books to work with those energies. So in addition to the cards and the decks where the primary message sort of comes through, I also have a few little things that I just like to kind of have on hand here. I have some candles and things of that nature. I have several of these little goddess figures from, I can't remember the name of the shop, but I will leave it linked below. I have several of these. They each represent different deities to me, and I tend to have these out along with candles or other things as a sort of visual representation, a focal point for the energy. So this one is for the Morrigan. The Morrigan also has her own dice set. So this is just a set of dice that I bought on Etsy. They're liquid core. And really at the beginning of the whole journey, it was just because they sort of match the cards. Like when you shake them up, you get all these kind of different colors that match what's going on in the Oracle deck. This has become her sole dice set. I do not use these dice for anything else. And in fact, I even have a separate set of dice for these cards when I'm using them outside of my Morrigan practice, and for other things and other types of readings, they have a totally different dice set. These dice are hers. She's claimed them. I only use them for her. And there's a bit of reverence in that as well, as having these tools set aside specifically for these deities. There's a bit of reverence there. There's a little bit of devotion. Then I've also created for the Morrigan, for the first time, I did a charm set for a deity. I put this together in my video in my members space, and I was just kind of talked through my process of selecting charms and how I work with them, how I put them together, how I decide what goes in here. There's a lot of course, ravens, there's some swords, some moons, things of that nature, things that just kind of remind me and tie into imagery and things that relate to the Morrigan. So another deity that I've done quite a bit of work with over the last year or so is Persephone. Now, Persephone was a really interesting one because she is primarily seen as or depicted as and interacted with as a maiden deity. But half of her story is about her becoming the queen of the underworld. And for me at this point in my life, and at the age I am, over 40 and everything, I connected more strongly with the idea of Persephone as an underworld queen than I did as a spring maiden. And that's where my journey with her began, and where it's sort of, I won't say ended because it's never ended, but where we are currently is that I work with Persephone primarily as that transitional energy of stepping into authentic self and of exploring both sides of that nature, right? The light and the dark, the above world and the underworld, the maiden and the queen of the underworld. And this was one of the decks that facilitated that connection for me. This is the Tarot of Persephone's Garden. Now, this is the second edition. I cannot remember the name of it, but it has a little bit more of a Queen of the Underworld vibe to it. I do have the first edition, which feels a little bit more spring maiden to me, but this is the one that I tend to work with the most because this energy really sits in alignment with how I perceive Persephone energy now, which is the maiden that became the queen of the underworld. I love that story. I love that energy. And it's something that I've worked with quite a bit in my own personal practice. So the oracle deck that I tend to use in my work with Persephone is the Flower Oracle. Now, both of these are indie decks. And this one is not specifically just geared toward Persephone for me. I do use it for lots of other things. It is not so much the deck that is like only solely hers. It's just an oracle that I use alongside the deck that is solely hers, which is the tarot in this case. But again, similarly to the way that I talked about communing and interacting with Morrigan energy is similar to how I work with Persephone here in terms of the cards. I'm letting the tarot and the oracle kind of help facilitate that conversation between me and the energy of Persephone. In this case, though, the oracle deck is not providing so much that foundational messaging like it was in the Call of the Morrigan, where that is the deck that is intimately connected to the deity herself. In this case, it is the tarot that is intimately connected to deity herself, and the oracle is just a supplement to that, just to help me sort of flesh out that messaging, to help me understand the connections that I need to be making. So it's a little bit of a flip-flop from what we saw from Morrigan energy, but again, still using cards to commune with this particular deity. I will sometimes switch out to other oracle decks if I feel like there's a different energy that I want to pull into her readings, but I always use the Tarot of Persephone's Garden when I commune with her. It is her deck. It is definitely the one that I work with most frequently. And at this point, it's pretty much the only tarot deck that I use when I commune with her. Similar to the Call of the Morrigan being specifically my Morrigan deck, the Tarot of Persephone's Garden is specifically my Persephone deck. Now this is a little bit more on the nose because both of those decks are actually geared toward those deity to pull that energy in. So I thought it was a great one to start with, just to kind of look at how these energies come through decks specifically made for them. I really enjoy working with these together. I feel like the Oracle deck kind of gives me a little bit of a framework for the reading itself, and I do tend to work with the keywords that are down here. So often I will have more than just 2 tarot cards on the table, because here I have 3 keywords. So I'd be looking at discernment, boldness, and inner strength. I have the 3 of Swords and the 8 of Coins, and then I'd be pulling probably another tarot into that just to give me what do I need to know about those 3 keywords. And again, this is just working with the idea and the energy of that story of Persephone, of how we become. As we find more of ourselves, as we step into being more authentically who we are, that is really what Persephone energy represents for me. I think I forgot to talk a little bit about what Morgan energy represents, and that is mostly because I am still figuring out what Morgan energy represents to me. That is a newer deity. We are still getting to know each other, so I haven't really cemented where she sits in my spiritual counsel and what guidance she provides me specifically. Persephone is definitely that energy that I go to when I need to step into that authentic self, when I need to go from being the maiden to the queen. And it's such a beautiful energy to work with. I love the story. I love the energy. And when I'm feeling in that space and when I feel like I need to really step into that, this is the deity that I go to and the decks that I primarily use to connect with that energy. So in addition to the decks, of course, I have dice, and Persephone does have her own dice set here. Again, similar to like I talked about with the Morgan, these are only for her. I do not use them for anything else. Every deity gets a whole collection of things specifically to them. It really just depends on how I work with them and how much I work with them and what types of tools I like to use with them. So definitely have dice that I use with Persephone. That helps me get into those really big overarching energies using the dice casting system that Lisa and I created. And then I also have, again, my little figurine, candles, things of that nature. And this one specifically represents Persephone for me. So my work with Persephone eventually led me down the rabbit hole of exploring Hades energy. Hades is, of course, the king of the underworld, and he is the god in association with the Persephone story. It's been a really interesting experience exploring Hades energy because I'll be honest, it's the first masculine deity that I've worked with outside of the traditional Christian God and Jesus, which I'll be honest, I did not actually work with. It was just kind of what I grew up with, a lot of us, right? And I stepped away from that. And then coming back to this idea of masculinity and deity was a bit of a challenging thing for me, given some religious trauma and things like that. So I stepped very carefully into this energy, and really I was surprised at how Hades and the Hades energy met me where I was. When I need to channel that sort of energy into my life, when I need that very strong, a little bit dark energy in my life, this beautiful sort of counterbalance to the Persephone, this is the energy that I work with. And it really does allow me to kind of explore that side of myself as well. So the deck that I use primarily for my communion with Hades has become the Darkness of Light. And this has been an interesting exploration with this deck, not only in terms of working with it and with deity, but also just with the deck itself. This is my second copy of this deck. I had the original first edition. I really hated the cardstock, and I was just like, it's just a Rider-Waite Smith. It's beautiful, but I don't need it because I have lots of decks that are beautiful Rider-Waite Smiths. And the cardstock was a really big sticking point for me. I couldn't even shuffle it. So I rehomed it, and I didn't really think about it again for many, many years until I started working with Hades energy again. And I started looking for decks that felt like Hades, that I could commune with Hades with. And this deck just kept coming to mind for me. And thankfully, I was able to purchase a copy of it from one of my beautiful members. And it is specifically Hades deck now. I don't think I could ever use it for anything else. It is so imbued with that energy, and I've done so much work with it, that this is the main conduit to that Hades energy. Now, in addition to that, I also have the Dante's Inferno Oracle. And this is interesting because this is an Oracle deck that only serves in this purpose. So just like my Darkness of Light is specifically my Hades tarot and I use it for nothing else, the Dante's Inferno has become my Hades oracle, and I use it for nothing else. Now, it's got that underworld kind of dark energy anyway. It works beautifully for this. I have pulled it into other readings for other things here and there on occasion. I've used it in some light and shadow spreads, and it does work really well. But really, over the last year or so, it's really just slotted into this space of being Hades. It belongs to him, and so I've just let it. So again, this is another one of those oracle decks that I do tend to get into the guidebook. Sometimes because I have to, sometimes because I have no idea what is going on in the art and what's going on in reference to the title. The titles don't always quite hit the mark in terms of the energy of the card. Sometimes what's written in the guidebook feels a little disjointed from it. However, I will say that when I kind of step away from that and I just work more visually with what's going on in the card, it definitely hits in the Hades energy. It's a little bit jarring. It shakes things up. It makes me think about things in a different way. It really does dive more into the darker aspects, or what we maybe call or think of as the shadow aspects. And I really love working with that energy. It feels very potent, especially when you pair it with the Persephone energy. Now, I do often work with Hades and Persephone together as a couple, as that masculine and feminine divine energy coming together. I do believe they can exist in one, but having them exist as sort of identities in their own helps me personally to wrap my brain around how those different energies show up for me in my life. Now, oftentimes this work is very challenging. This is definitely a deity that holds up the mirror, that looks at those darker aspects, that looks at the shadow things, the things that maybe I don't necessarily always want to acknowledge, but need to for my own personal growth. And the funny thing about Hades and working with that energy is that it feels more approachable and it feels more in alignment with me and how I see the world than some of the other masculine deities that I've encountered. I really hate to, use those really defining terms of masculine and feminine, but in some of these deity cases, this is how I've approached them, and this is how they've come to me, and they're very potent in that way. So I also don't want to discount and dishonor the potency of that energy and the lessons and the teachings within them by glossing over that aspect of it. And Hades has been one of those deities that it's just, he kind of clicked for me. He feels like, and I don't know if this is like proper thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, because this is just me verbalizing my own experience with this work and these deities. But Hades kind of feels like the hero in a dark romance. And it's a very romanticized version of Hades. And I do get that. And I'm not trying to discount his ferocity or anything of that nature. But I feel like he's like the dark anti-hero. He shows you all the things that, you've been taught not to see, and all of the things that you've been taught are bad or wrong or that's taboo or things of that nature, and brings them to the forefront and brings them into the light. And it's a really interesting combination. And that's kind of how I think about Hades and Persephone. It's kind of how I work with them in this almost storybook, dark fantasy, hero, heroine kind of way, where they're each bringing something to the table. And when I work with them together, they really help me to see all aspects of a situation or all aspects of self or whatever it is that I'm questioning or doing the work or the reading around. And it's a really interesting way to engage with that work. And I don't mean to discount the work in any way by relating it to a romance novel, but that is how I work with it. And to me, that's potent. That's powerful. There's a lot of powerful, potent growth energy that for me comes through working with the idea of fantasy, of story and make-believe and all of that. And there's a lot of healing work that I've done personally around that. And Hades has definitely been helpful in that work. He, of course, has his own set of dice. And I always joke that these dice, they are really sharp and pokey, and they are very difficult to work with. They do not like to go back in their jar. They like to just go wherever they want. Sometimes they're stubborn and they don't want to roll. These dice embody Hades energy. If I would say any dice in my collection embody a deity, it's my Hades dice. They have such a vibe, a mood, and energy. And this just kind of illustrates how I feel that my tools, my cards, my dice, my figurines, they all get imbued with the intention and the energy that I put into them. And I feel like these dice represent that really beautifully. So of course I would never use them for anything other than Hades because they are his, and I think he'd be really mad if I did anyway. Then I also have a figurine that I recently got for him. Again, just another tool like the candles and the things of that nature that help me just create a visual reference and create sacred space on my table when I'm engaging with this work. So another deity that I've taken to working with over the last year or so is Lilith, and that's been a really interesting energy to dive into. Like all of these deities, I've done quite a bit of research with her, and Lilith is often the deity that I call to and work with when I need to like really step into my inner power, in that I don't give a shit what anybody else thinks. This is what I need and this is what I'm going to do. And that sort of really grown up, almost rebellious, angsty energy. It's like the teen energy, but in grown up form. And it is potent and it is powerful and it is feral. And that's kind of the vibe that Lilith has for me. So the deck that ended up finding its way into my Lilith work is actually the Tarot of Vampyres. And I could not be happier when I discovered that that is what this deck is for me. I have tried many times to connect with this deck and it did not work. I mean, it's beautiful and I really enjoyed the artwork. It's got a very like 1990s kind of vibe here and I'm all about it. 1990s vampires, yes, please. But also, it just didn't really fit with anything else I had going on. It didn't really fit in anywhere in my practice or in the type of work that I was doing. And so I kept just setting it aside. And then one day, Lilith popped up and was like, this is the deck I want to work with. And so I ended up pulling it out. And ever since then, this now has become my Lilith deck. Again, similar to some of the others we've talked about. It's completely dedicated to her and I would never use it for anything else because it is her deck. In addition to that, I also have the Lilith Oracle. Now, the Tarot of Vampyres, I do believe is out of print now. It was a mass market deck, but I'm pretty sure it's gone out of print. The Lilith Oracle is a indie deck and it's quite a small indie deck, and I do have some challenges with this deck. It's very hard to read the titles and the keywords on the bottom, but the energy of this deck and the artwork that's included really feels in alignment with Lilith energy, and I love using it as more of kind of a focal point. So I feel like she kind of speaks fairly equally through these two decks, and I almost always work with them together now. So I'm using the Oracle as to kind of give me what is the main focal point message from Lilith. What does she need me to know right now? What power do I need to step into, which is usually what it is about. What inner power do I need to bring forward? And here we have Temple. I can read that. I can't read what it says below it, but we have the Lord of Skulls and the Nine of Grails. This is just an amazing little pairing. I love the energy that comes through. It always feels very much in alignment with what I'm trying to bring forward from myself. So whereas like Persephone energy is there's a little bit of Lilithy vibe to it. There's a lot of crossover in deity energy for me. I feel like they kind of all are just aspects of the same, all aspects of the one, the all, the whole. And so I'm just tapping into those different sort of energies, into those different versions of that energy through the different work with the deities. And so Lilith, unlike Persephone, which Persephone is very much stepping into your authentic self, stepping into your authentic power. That is in a much more almost mundane, but also just kind of everyday restrained kind of way. Lilith energy is when you're pissed about it. That's how I engage with it. And that's how I found it's come through in my practice, is that there's a fury here. There's a rage. The world is unfair and unjust, and I'm just trying to be myself within it, and everybody and everything is trying to stop that. And that's the sort of energy that comes through for Lilith. She is very much about breaking boundaries for me. She's very much about crashing through expectation. It's about being feral, being raw, being real, and in a very unapologetic way. Whereas Persephone energy, stepping into that authentic self, is more about just acknowledging the growth work that's done, the fact that I've gone from being maiden to adult, right, to queen of my own little underworld here. And it's an honoring of that, and it's a stepping into it, but it's a much quieter, much more gentle sort of stepping into that authenticity, where the Lilith energy is ragey. It's feral, it's mean. And it for me just sort of radiates with kind of that crone, wild woman crone energy. And I absolutely adore working with it. When I get to that point where I'm just like done, this is often the deity that I will go to, and I will take some time in communion with Lilith to not only honor that, because I think it is important to honor, like, rage is a valid emotion, anger is a valid emotion. It's what you do with it that swings it one way or the other that matters. And so Lilith does a really great job of holding space for that for me, and then for walking me through it. So validating that as an experience, but then helping me find my way through it. And these decks are how I do that. I pull, again, cards, throw some dice, things of that nature to figure out what I need in this moment. What messaging do I need? How do I move forward from here? So I do have a set of dice that I use with Lilith, but unlike some of the other dice that we've talked about so far, these are not specifically just for Lilith. They're also dice that I use for my dark urge stuff, or sometimes in shadow readings. I feel like they work really well for that, but I do tend to pull them into readings with Lilith as well. She doesn't care. She doesn't need dedicated dice. She's totally fine with it. We've had a chat. And then I also have this little figurine for her, again, from that same shop. And this is the one that I use, again, along with candles and things of that nature, to just create sacred space on my table. So another deity that I've done a lot of work with over the years is Hecate. Depending on your tradition and how you approach her depends on which pronunciation you tend to use. She was one of the first deity energies that really stepped forward for me in a profound way. And I have worked with other deities along the way. I've worked with Isis and Sedna and Kali and a lot of other just deities for just some little small workings here and there. What I'm primarily focusing on here in this video is deities that I've done heavy work with, that I've done devotional work with, that I've used not only in practice and in personal growth, but as part of my spiritual counsel. And Hecate was one of the first deity to really sit in that space for me. Now, the decks that I've used with her have fluctuated over the years because she's been a deity that I've worked with on and off for many years now. She comes and goes depending on when I need her to show up. She does. Recently, I have taken to working with the ritual tarot with her because this is a bit how I see her energy. Now, it's really interesting because Hecate or Hecate, she's often approached as the queen of the witches. She's often approached in her story along with Hades and Persephone and Demeter. She was definitely a part of that myth and that narrative. But if you go back further, if you study her lineage, even beyond that, before that, for me, she's more of a primordial energy, less queen of witches, more ancient primordial deity. And that's really how I engage with her energy, is how I've come to understand her and how I work with her. Not so much as a deity with a particular lore, a particular myth tied around her, but a much broader, much deeper, much older sort of energy. She kind of, for me, represents the idea of deity in humanity's lineage. So it goes way, way back. And this is why at the beginning of the video, I sort of caveated this whole thing with this is just my experience, because I understand that this is not how most people work with Hecate or Hecate. Most people engage with her in her sort of queen of the witches, in alignment with her story and mythology around the Persephone myth, and yes, the crossroads and the helping find your way through the dark. And she is beautiful for that. And I have definitely worked with her energy in that way and in alignment with those particular stories. But really, where I dive into my foundational work with her is deeper than that. It's primordial, it's ancient. She kind of represents the original deity, the essence of divine connection in a very primordial sense. That's just kind of the key phrase that I keep coming back to, because her lineage can be traced back beyond, way beyond all of those more, I was going to say modern, but you know what I mean, more modern in the sense of the whole of humanity. But within her more common myths, she goes back further, and you can find traces of it throughout human history, actually. And it's really fascinating. I've done a lot of deep dive work with her, and I've really gone down the rabbit hole of her various different aspects and stories. And possibly because of that, because of the research that I've done, and because of all the different threads and rabbit holes that I've explored with her, I've really found that sitting in this sort of more ancient, overarching energy is where she shows up for me a lot of the time now. And that's kind of how I work with her and why I chose the Ritual Tarot, because it has a lot of that sort of archaic energy to it. Now, a little interesting thing about some of these figures. So this, again, comes from another creator. I have a couple of these little figurines, and these figurines are all based on the imagery of Mary, which is really interesting to me because I have thoughts around the whole Mary thing and the different faces of the goddess. But I love this connection in this particular figurine between that primordial Hecate energy that I was talking about and the more modern take of Mary as a divine energy. Hecate is like my least fussy deity. I use these dice for other things as well, but they're just like, they've got some little skulls in them and some moss. And they originally were D&D dice, and I cannot read the numbers on them very well, so they got banned from the D&D table because it took me far too long to read with them. And so I started bringing them into my tarot practice, into my divination work, and they work beautifully. And I often use them with Hecate as well, so I think they just really pick up that energy well. But it's just funny that I think I have the least amount of things really for Hecate, even though she is one of the deities that I've done probably the most work with and for the longest. But she's just my less fussy. She shows up, she gets the job done. There's very little dramatic flair with her, and I appreciate that about her. She's all business. So another deity energy that I've worked with quite a bit and still sits pretty firmly on my spiritual council is working with the energy of Mother Mary. So again, similar to a lot of these energies, how I've approached her has been a little bit interesting. One of the decks that I think was the most influential in my work with Mary and coming to terms with her as a goddess figure in her own right is the Mysteries of Mary. Now, this is an indie deck. I do not know the status of this deck, whether it is in print or out of print. It comes and goes, but this deck is amazing. It's full of these little dioramas, and really where it's at with this deck for me is actually the guidebook, which I didn't even pull out, and I probably should have, but it's in the stories. It's in the narrative, the teachings that come through the guidebook. The cards are beautiful. The work is beautiful. I could do just as much potent work with this just having the guidebook. But it is the deck that I think really helped me to get to know Mary outside of what I had been taught in my childhood. And so it's an interesting one to come around to that as an adult now, where I can make my own decisions about what things mean to me and how I want to approach them. Mother Mary is definitely an energy that I approach in sort of like a self-care sort of way. When I'm feeling very tender, when I need that hand holding, when I need comfort and space, when I need the mothering, that's the energy I go to. And I really have done quite a bit of work with the Mysteries of Mary. I do tend to use this one as a oracle deck, though not a tarot. It is technically a tarot. It is a full tarot system, but I really enjoy working with it as an oracle, letting the messages from the guidebook really tell me what's going on within the reading, within the stories. So really at that point, the cards are just kind of placeholders on the table for the message, because the message actually comes from the guidebook. And then I pull tarot sometimes around it, but I'll be honest, a lot of times if I'm working with this deck, I'm just working with it on its own. It is enough, it's robust enough on its own that I don't really need anything else. And it's just one that I kind of pull out when I don't really need a big elaborate reading. I just want a simple moment and message with Mary, and I just need a little bit of that mothering energy to come through. And so this is the deck that I go to for that, and I just pull out a single card, I read from the guidebook, spend a little time in reflection, maybe some journaling, and then I go on with my day. And it's, again, kind of like Hecate, it's a no muss, no fuss kind of energy. But more recently, I've been exploring another new little collection of cards to work with Mary. So I recently got this Heavenly Souls tarot deck, and I'll be honest, I'm quite in love with it. I think it's beautiful. I love the interpretation of the cards. I love the energy of it, the mixed media aspect of it. And I found that it really does actually represent Mary energy for me really well. Because on the one hand, we have the tarot card, which has its overarching meaning, right? But then we also have all these little collage elements that have been brought together to create nuances within the card. And I feel like that kind of embodies Mary energy for me. She is one thing, and I was taught to see her as one thing many, many years ago. But as I've explored it now here as an adult in my own way, I've found that there's many, many facets to her work and her story. And so I've been exploring a little bit this idea of Mary as multifaceted through this particular deck and working with this Doreen Virtue deck. Now, this is a very old, very out of print deck, which will always be just a treasure in my collection because it was sent to me by a very dear person, and I love it. It's my favorite. It's my favorite Mary deck. I do like the Mysteries of Mary, but this combo is where it's at for me. This is more approachable. This feels like actually sitting down and communing with the energy of Mary herself. And I really enjoy working with it. And these two together have been really potent. I'm just giggling at the messages on the top because like I couldn't have planned that any better. We have God in the center with the Tower and the High Priestess. This whole idea of shaking up what Mary has meant historically within the context of the religion that I have grown up with, or the various religions that I'd grown up with, and stepping into her as a power of her own. Amazing. It's beautiful. I really love these together. It's been something new that I've been exploring, not necessarily Mary energy being new, but this little combination of decks, exploring her energy through my work and through communion with these decks has been a really potent and fun process to really uncover over the last couple of weeks. I really love the way they work together. I feel like they balance each other really well, and the messages are really clear. When I just see them on the table, they just make me happy. And it's really funny because this deck is horribly designed. It's terrible design. It's very old school. So, you know, like there's a bit of nostalgia for that, but it's a terribly designed deck. Sometimes it's hard to read. The colors are atrocious. This is an absolutely stunningly designed deck. It's one of my favorite collage decks. I think the collaging is brilliant and beautiful. The production value is top notch. And then you pair that with this sort of hot mess of this old school sort of energy in this oracle. But I think they work together too, because this also kind of shows on the table the energy of that sort of taking that old school idea of Mary and what she's meant sort of historically and what I was raised or taught, I suppose, to believe that she was, and then sort of contrasting that with how I approach her energy today, sort of represented through the tarot deck here. And I think it's just a really beautiful combination, and I think they work really well together. This is definitely a new pairing that I've been working with her, but I've been really enjoying it, and it's been giving me a lot of great messages and a lot of support and a lot of comfort, and again, that's sort of mothering when I need it. And it's been a really beautiful process. So again, I have another one of these little Mary figures. It's beautiful. I love having this on the table when I'm doing work with Mary, when I'm communing with her. And of course, I have dice. Now, again, these aren't specifically just for Mary. I do have sometimes, occasionally, other dice I will pull in. But these little pink ones, because they probably sit with all of these decks on the shelf, I just tend to gravitate towards pulling these out as well, although they're not specifically just for her. So the last little member of my spiritual council that I want to talk about is the Black Madonna. Now, this is very tied into Mary work as well. The Black Madonna is an aspect of that, and it's been really interesting to come around to my own sort of ideas of this. Now, the deck that was really foundational to this work is actually the Mysteries of the Black Madonna. Again, another deck that just is a treasure in my collection, was also sent to me by a beautiful person. I will eternally be grateful because this deck was actually the deck that kicked off my whole exploration of the Black Madonna energy. And this is an energy that is really interesting because it's kind of the opposite of Mother Mary energy for me. It is the energy that is like, it is not going to hold your hand. It is not going to comfort you and tell you everything's going to be okay. It is going to tell you, get your shit together. It's enough goofing around. Get it together, get the work done. It's very much a sort of shadowy energy, but there is power in that. This is the deck that I go to when I really don't know what the hell is going on or what is wrong, essentially, what I'm not seeing. And this deck and this little combo and this work with this sort of energy really helps me to find my way through that. I've done a lot of also trauma healing with it, which is really interesting. I have a whole another selection of decks I could talk about specifically just for trauma healing. But this is one that is like, I pull it out when kind of like I need the kick in the pants, when I need somebody to just say, okay, enough self-pity, enough like with the self-care and the hand-holding and all of that. Like, lady, get your shit done. That's what this deck does, and that's how I end up pulling it out. So the Mysteries of the Black Madonna is interesting because, again, it's one that I do have to use the guidebook. I have not only can I not read half of these titles on here, I have no idea what all of these cards mean. I definitely work with it as an oracle, and again, similar to the Mysteries of Mary by the same creator, it kind of serves as just a holding place, a focal point within the reading, and I use it like an oracle. So it kind of sits here. I do really love the imagery in this deck, even more so than the Mysteries of Mary. It's kind of more of an alignment with my vibe, I guess, as you could say. But it's a great one for tapping into that energy. And funny enough, the deck that really has come into play with this energy for me is the Somnia Tarot. Now, I didn't expect this, and it's definitely not a deck that I would say is like my Black Madonna deck, because I use it for a lot of other things. I think it is an excellent deck. It's great for shadow work. It's great for helping you see the things that you don't necessarily want to face. There is a definite mood and energy to this card. This Judgment card stalked me last year, like big time. I really love this deck. But it's one that when I pair it with the Black Madonna here, which is very tall, so we're going to just kind of pull that down a little bit. When I pair it with the Black Madonna, it just clicks and I know what's trying to come through. This on its own, I don't necessarily know what to do with. It's a great jumping off point for me, but it doesn't give me something tangible. It doesn't give me something to work with, something to dive into. I can read in the guidebook, and that's great, but the tarot is really for me where the messaging comes through with my work with the Black Madonna. So I use this as a way to kind of funnel and maybe channel Black Madonna energy, that very specific, very particular type of energy and type of work that I need to do or want to do. And then the tarot really is where the messaging comes through. I don't even necessarily need to get into the guidebook when I work with this deck. Sometimes I just pull a card as a focal point and let it visually be the reference, the anchor. This is the channel, the conduit into Black Madonna energy. I don't necessarily need to know what this card is telling me, because it's almost like the messaging is flowing through this card into the tarot, and the tarot is where the messages come from. I have some other decks that I pull into practice with this. I think I've shown them in videos and probably on Instagram and stuff like that. I tend to pull the Death Doula in a lot. It works beautifully with these, not only in terms of Black Madonna energy, but also when I'm just working with the Somnia Tarot. They are chef's kiss together, but they are potent, and you need to be ready for these messages. And that's one of the things of working with the Black Madonna energy, is it's not something that I go to casually. It's not an energy that I engage with just on the fly in the moment. I do have some deities that I work with that energy with. The Morrigan actually has been one of those deities for me, of just, kind of on the fly working with deity energy. It's more every day. It's more mundane in a sense, whereas the Black Madonna feels very removed. And when I come to this work, I do so with intention, and I do so with an open mind and an open heart, and also a little bit of some boundaries in place, because this has the potential to really throw some stuff at me, and it's not always pleasant. And sometimes it really does ask me to do some really deep, hard work, and I have to be ready for that. And it's perfect and great when I need to, but I don't do it casually. I don't come to the Black Madonna casually. I tried once upon a time, and there's probably a video on my channel somewhere in the archives, such as it were, of me talking about, I used to work with the Black Madonna energy at the dark moon and the Mother Mary at the full moon. I'm not doing moon practices in that way anymore. As beautiful as I think they are, it doesn't really fit in alignment with my life. But I also found that the Black Madonna for me didn't really fit that energy very well. It was, in a sense, too mundane. Her energy is one that I engage with for very specific work, and not something that I just throw down on the table because it happens to be a dark moon. Over time, that really started creating a disconnect for me, trying to force this deity into that practice. And it just ended up kind of creating a little bit of a disconnection between me and the Black Madonna, and kind of had to take a break from each other. And sometimes that happens with deity. Sometimes I need to take a break from deity. There's deity that I work with regularly, and deity that I work with for special occasions and when I need specific things. Now, the Black Madonna is also one of those deity that she does not have a bunch of fussy stuff for her. I've got nothing. I've got no dice, no candles, no figurines, no nothing. Because when I come to this energy, it is not about sitting down so much and making sacred space and creating a sort of, little bubble of comfort within my everyday. It is about getting down to the work. Sort of like Hecate, we don't need all the excess. Just connect with the energy, put the cards down, and do the work. So because I often get asked about my work with deity and goddesses and things of that nature, I thought I would just touch upon some of the deity and energies that I do work with and some of the tools that I use. Again, getting into the really nitty-gritty of those practices, very personal work, and I do explore some of that in my member space. But I thought this was a great way to just kind of approach the topic, to think a little bit about those deity that are on my spiritual council and how I engage with those energy. Again, it's a very me thing. I feel like working with deity, working with goddess energy or God energy is a very personal and private thing. And I think it's unique to all of us and flavored by our own unique views of the world. If you do work with deity and they are part of your spiritual practice or part of your tarot practice, I would love to know about it. So definitely feel free to share with me in the comments. As always, you'll find links for everything I've shown here in the description box below. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed this video and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.